Welcome everybody to our virtual plant clinic. Again, our bi-weekly virtual plant clinic. For those in regular attendance, I'm not Sally Burrows. Sally is still away right now, but she should be back with us next week. I once again am Daniel Kapp. I'm one of the other people, usually one of the people behind the camera. But I'm doing hosting duties again, filling in for Sally. So today we have David Yost here, who's been with us for, gosh, how many years now, David?
It's been 25, if you can believe that.
25 of the 51 years. We actually had our 51st anniversary just this past Saturday. And so David has been here for just about half of it. Of our time here at Merrifield Garden Center. But so today, David is going to be talking about native plants. For those of you who have not been with us before, this is a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So we can't see you or hear you, but you will be able to write in questions under the Q&A tab, or you can also chat with me and other people through the chat tab. And some people like to put their questions on the chat tab as well, and that's fine. And we will get to as many questions as we can towards the end of the webinar. If your question doesn't get answered, feel free to contact me through our contact us form on our website, www.merrifieldgardencenter.com, and then ask me the questions that you have, and then I'll get those over to David, just in case David's not going to be able to answer your question live on the air today. But I think that's about it. So without any further ado, David, take it away.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And Daniel, thanks for stepping in for Sally. Daniel and I, we actually just sit a couple desks apart from each other. So we work well together on fielding a lot of your questions. As I said, if we don't get to them today during the chat session, then by all means, email that to us. We're always happy to follow up on any questions you might have. So I feel like saying, welcome to spring. I feel like finally, here we are now, mid-April, I finally feel like spring is here. We had all those cold, cloudy days that sort of hung in there, but now all the signs, flowers in bloom, bees flying around, it feels like maybe we've really crossed that line and spring has arrived. Of course, this time of year can always be a little dicey. I think I saw somewhere in the forecast the next few days, even 37 degrees. So again, that's not cold enough to do any real damage, but if you have some tender plants that you just bought at the garden center or something like that, and you see temperatures going down to 40s, it doesn't hurt to bring them into the garage or basement, shelter them a little bit just on that cold evening. But having said that little qualifier, and knowing that we could still get some frost ahead, I'm going to say welcome spring and thank you for joining us. And it only makes sense to me at this time of year that we would talk about native plants. Spring in our region is just so breathtakingly beautiful and excruciatingly short time that we really want to make the best of this season. So I'm just going to jump right in here with a couple pictures to kick this thing off. And let's see. There we go. As I was saying, we are just so fortunate to have such a beautiful and diverse native flora this year. So this image I took, I think, last spring about this time of year out at Seneca Park, which is just up above Great Falls. Wonderful regional park. And you can see it's a beech forest, very heavily dominated by these beech trees. And beech, any of you that have these know, they create a pretty dense canopy. They got pretty aggressive root system. So a lot of times you have this kind of open understory that's under there. It's also nice because this particular area has been relatively undisturbed that we know of for at least about 200-300 years, because it has a history that goes back to George Washington when he was working as a surveyor, and they were working on trying to develop a canal that would run right down along the Potomac River. This is up above the river, that would allow early settlers to be able to navigate their way through the rapids that are in that region. So This is what I really, really love most when we talk about native plants. It allows us to explore everything about our history. It goes back to the history of the land, tells us, and it records in detail what activities have gone on before us. The native population of plants tells us a lot about the environment that we're in, and we really have so much to learn and enjoy from it. And it's such an incredibly special time of year and fleeting time of year. I just can't emphasize enough to go out and visit the natural areas in the parklands, because everything is happening right now. Most of the areas that we see have been heavily disturbed and altered by people, and you get a lot of understory brush, and it's usually full of invasive plants. So when we can find some of these undisturbed areas, they are just really special. And all that greenery that you see on the forest floor, those are actually wildflowers that are showing up in here. If you were to get in there and look in detail, you start to see this is what's called the sessile trillium. Now that tends to be a little more down towards the river sides, or where little pockets of moisture have, but most of this greenery that you see is actually spring beauty, this little white flower, and it just blankets the forest floor there. Claytonia virginica, that's after John Clayton, one of the early botanists, and again, gives us the region of its origins here in Virginia. If you continue to explore, you find like the little trout lilies that are in full bloom right now, absolutely gorgeous. And then behind it, member of the mustard family, this is what's called a spotted toothwort back there. So all of this stuff is happening right now. So you owe it to yourself to go out there, enjoy it. And most of all, I hope it really starts to open your eyes into more awareness of our established native plant communities. This is sort of like the showstopper event in the wildflower area, and these are the Virginia bluebells. This is a huge bank of them that flows all along Cub Run, but you'll find Virginia bluebells really all along the stream valleys, throughout the Northeast, but particularly right here in Virginia. And so you'll find them all along Cub Run, Bull Run. I just happened to stop by, and we had the Bluebell Festival last weekend. Even stopped by and say hi to a few folks there, and went out and get some pictures. So this is it's a wonderful story. And like I said, it's going to last for a week, maybe 2 weeks. But these are not just going out and looking at beautiful flowers. What this really represents is a plant community that has evolved and adapted over thousands of years to fit this particular environment. And it does that also in terms of supporting its own natural community of pollinators and insects, that again supports its own community of wildlife, birds, and all the other larger mammals that live in there. So the real message that I have today, if you just maybe take home one message, and we're probably all on the same page here, but is the absolute importance of preserving these critical regions. Because they are under a tremendous amount of pressure. This country has been under development for agriculture and industry and housing and highways and all that for a few hundred years now. And these plant communities are fewer and fewer between, and they're incredibly stressed. If we took much step away from this picture, you would start seeing honeysuckle and all kinds of invasive plants growing throughout this region. So first and foremost, I love to say, conserve, preserve what we have. And then what I want to talk about really throughout the rest of my little presentation here is how we can take some of these native plants, introduce them into our gardens, and at least make some humble effort at sort of trying to preserve the natural plant communities we have, and all the insects and animals and such that rely on them. Now, some of these plants, like the Virginia bluebell, is actually a pretty nice garden plant. Just like the environment you see here, is it really thrives in moist stream valley communities. So it's not something that you're going to put out in hot sun or really highly disturbed compacted soils or anything like that. But if you're fortunate enough where you have kind of a woodland garden, and you're fortunate enough to have good soil, you've invested the time to develop a relatively rich soil, then you can be successful in growing these. It is a reliable perennial, continues to spread by short rhizome, and it also tends to reseed itself. These are all what I call spring ephemerals. What they are doing is they are taking this opportunity of early spring to capture the sunlight as it filters down through a canopy of deciduous trees. As these trees leaf out and the density of shade increases, these plants eventually get shaded out and go into a summer dormancy. So they naturally have a very sort of short window of opportunity of flowering, and they have to make them the best of it. So some of these plants do better in our gardens than others. And a part of that is because if I talk about things like sanguinaria, the bloodroot, you know, it may have a bloom time of about 5 days, and then they go into summer dormancy. Anemones, same type of thing. So one of the things I look for if I'm going to bring these into my garden is, one is that they can actually live and grow in the environments that we have. And other is sometimes some of them will have a little longer bloom period, be a little bit showier than others. And these are all things that we need to take into consideration. The tree canopy pretty much hits full density by June. And so that's kind of marks the end of the growing season on a lot of these spring ephemerals that you'll see in the woodlands. Now this little dwarf crested iris, this picture is taken in front of my townhouse yard in Centerville, you know, so it's a urban, suburban kind of environment, you know, where I did put some effort into enhancing the soil just by adding compost in there, mixing it in. But this crested iris has been really a joy to have. They are not blooming quite yet, but probably will be within the next 1 to 2 weeks. Again, so it looks just like the big iris that many of us grow in our garden, big German iris, but brought down in scale to only being a few inches tall. This thing creeps and spreads by rhizome. That clump that you see there, I planted originally as a 4-inch pot, you know, just one of these little 4-inch pots of that crested iris. And over time, it spread. It's now continued to migrate out of my garden. It's like this plant has a mind of its own. It's going where it wants to go. And this clump has now migrated back to the other side of the tree that you see in there. But it's a fun little flower to greet us in spring. And again, the foliage pretty much starts to yellow and wither as we get into midsummer. And so by the end of summer, it's back down hiding under the mulch. Again, you can see I'm by no means, I am not a native only plant. I like to incorporate natives wherever I can, and I certainly give them a thumbs up on that when I'm making my plant decisions. But in here you can see I have what's called green and gold chrysogonum. This is another wonderful Virginia native plant. It's a perennial, spreads out, makes a nice ground cover in there. You'll see the bright yellow flowers on there, which is sort of everybody's attractor. And that starts up usually, some of them are maybe beginning to bloom now. Again, this is a little bit early, but I really think of this as kind of a May, June bloomer. But you will have this nice emerald green foliage that goes through the summertime, and it takes on this kind of a burgundy color as we go into the fall. Some people call it almost like a semi-evergreen, so it lasts pretty well into the season. So again, this is just a fantastic plant, does well in the garden if you're in this woodland environment. It needs, I'm going to say, at least a few hours of sun. I don't want to put it out in full, all blazing sun, but if you've got this filtered light coming through a canopy, you can see in the background, this is that crested iris that we're just looking at. And then again, this is the chrysogonum, the green and gold. I think it's important. I love to have plants sort of trail and cover the ground as much as possible. Because if we cover the soil, that means there's less opportunity for weeds to go in, less opportunity for erosion. Tends to lead to a lower maintenance garden. And again, this serving pollinators there and providing habitat for a lot of our native insects. Where we're trying to create good, healthy plant communities, it's also important that we have a sequence of blooms. We want blooms at all different times throughout the season. So at this point, I just tossed in the Joe Pye weed, which again is a phenomenal, sturdy perennial, native perennial for use in our gardens. This is a plant that will grow in anywhere from sort of part sun, part shade, all the way up to full sun environments. It does like moist conditions. So again, they're adapted to our clay soils. Boy, this thing lights up in late summer. So we're talking about flowering more towards August, even September time period. And when it comes into bloom, it's like every pollinator, every kind of bee and butterfly you can think of comes to visit this plant. Sometimes they can get to be quite large. It's not unusual to see the Joe Pye weeds. Sometimes it may even go up to 6, 7 feet tall easily. And when they get that big tall and we get these heavy storms, it's not unusual to see them get knocked over then. So there are a couple ways that we can manage that in our gardens. One is to go in and do what I call kind of a mid-season pruning. If you know that these plants are going to get tall and leggy, maybe we go in around, let's say, a June time period, and you can trim them back, and that will keep them bushier and smaller. The individual blossoms are a little smaller, but they're still prolific. There are varieties that have been developed for the horticultural trade that stay smaller and more compact. They have names like Little Joe would be one of them. And this kind of brings up one of the important parts that when we discuss native plants, a lot of times these will be the same plant species. So it's the same plant, but if we recognize that, hey, this kind of gets tall, it tends to flop over, it becomes a little bit of an issue for us in smaller gardens or more managed landscape, more manicured types landscapes. Horticulturalists begin looking at this saying, well, I love this plant, but is there a way I can make one that's a little shorter and stockier? And so when I start talking about cultivars, that means it's the same species, but somebody has gone in there and manipulated, in this case, keep it shorter or stockier. It might be a matter of bloom later or maybe a repeat flowering, but they're looking for some characteristic that goes into that. So this is pictured down at Meadowlark Gardens, another must-visit place. Every time I think I've visited every park in the region, I always discover that there's one more, a new one that's popped up. But I go without these because I just love learning from what other people have done out there. So this is the Hahn Horticulture Garden down in Blacksburg, Virginia. So you'd have to make a trip, but if you are in that area or you're taking your family down there or for any reason, I encourage you to definitely check this out. Again, this is a few years old. I don't know if the garden's constantly changing, so I don't know if you'd still find this same image there. But this is the Joe Pye weed right here in the corner of the image. Behind it, this little shrub is called Virginia pepperbush, or sometimes it's Clethra onifolia is its name. And again, these tend to grow in these kind of moist environments, these stream valley conditions. They're well adapted to our sometimes wet, soggy soils during there. So these are all good advantages to them. And it looks like the Clethra has probably finished flowering at that point. Again, that's a summer bloom. And now the Joe Pye is creeping in. Obviously, it's incorporated with tropical plants like bananas in the background and some of these upright forms of sedum and everything. So they have brought these in, again, primarily so that for they're beautiful and they make nice garden plants, but then they're also very, very good as far as supporting our native pollinators. It kind of makes me think a little bit this morning as I was sort of gathering plants up, I was back in our nursery and I saw all over the skip laurels and the autolucans laurels, which are in full bloom and they're far from native plants, but they had mason bees, our little native solitary bees, all over them gathering pollen and seeking nectar. So it's important that we have plants in bloom for them now, early in spring, but then we also need plants that are in bloom later. And I forgot the way I put my slides together. I said, okay, I'm going to do 3 perennials, 4 shrubs, and 5 trees. This was kind of on my agenda. So with this, I'm kind of migrating from perennials over to shrubs. And I can't possibly do this topic justice in the time we have, just highlighting a few points. Like I said, we have over 3,000 species of plants just naturally found growing, uncultivated plants, we call them, throughout Virginia. So we're pretty fortunate in that regard. An amazing shrub, native shrub that you might be able to find a home for in your landscape is this arrowwood viburnum. I always look for plants that give me a full, broad season of interest that's in there. Because again, as you know, I'm gardening on a small scale, and so every little square foot is important to me. So if I have something that comes up and blooms for a week, that doesn't really cut it for me. Something like this arrowwood viburnum that gives me blossoms in spring, which then produces these interesting, beautiful berries by late summer, and then also gives me a fall color. Now I've got a plant that's giving me seasonal beauty, you know, from spring through summer through fall. And of course, all the ecological services that it offers. So it's not just about providing something pretty for us to look at, but I've got blossoms for pollinators, berries for birds, and then shelter for winter habitat goes on there. So arrowwood viburnum, Viburnum dentatum, it gets its name because I go back to one of the few things I still remember from college days. The leaf, the serration on there is a very called dentate, like a tooth margin, like little right angles along that the margin of that leaf. If you saw this plant just growing out in the wild, it easily goes 6, 7, 8 foot tall, and it gets its name because they say Native Americans. It has these long, straight stems, and so the Native Americans would cut these, and because they were long and straight, they were like the ideal dimensions to use in making arrows. So again, these plants, they all have a history of their own, which is fascinating. But because it's such a tall, leggy plant, again, this is where horticulturalists have kind of jumped into the game and selected specific ones that stay shorter, stockier, maybe work in our more manicured landscapes. They come up with a cute name for it, and here we go. But there's always several other varieties that we can look at in there. Sticking in the shrub category, Virginia sweetspire. Here I'm showing off the fall color. They will flower for us in May. This is again, it's just a phenomenal landscape shrub. Like many of them that just seem to be popping up. I didn't plant it this way, but it grows in moist environments. So everything I'm showing you in here has kind of been for that moist environment, but considering the amount of rain and the drainage issues and all that we've been facing, maybe that's a good thing. But you will find this everywhere from residential landscapes to shopping malls. It's a pretty tolerant plant of different extremes, anywhere from sort of a full sun to part shade conditions. If you put them in really dense, heavy shade, they're just going to be lackluster. So we want to make sure we get a little bit of sun on there, keep them dense, keep them full like this. So I'll give you tassels of white flowers in May. They do have a slight fragrance to it, but they're very attractive blossoms. And then this again is the fall coloration. It's considered what we call semi-evergreen. I really figure it's going to drop 80 or 90% of the leaves. It may have a few leaves hang on if it's a mild winter. So think of it as deciduous, but you know, sometimes you'll see it labeled that way. Again, it's that seasonal interest that gives us throughout the time. Again, there's variety. So you get something anywhere from we call Little Henry because it stays small and compact, to Henry's Garnet, which is selected specifically for its fall coloration. So you'll see these different names, but they've been selected for these specific floral qualities or foliage color or size of plant, which again, is all the kind of stuff that you come in and talk with us about. The good news is that we continue to have more and more native plants available. Bad news is, you know, there's still a lot of catching up to do. Some of these plants are a little more difficult to propagate. They're not as widely produced, not as readily available, but because the demand is there, because you, our customers, continue to ask for them, industry is responding, and we're getting way more choices today than we had, say, even 10 years ago. So this is, again, down at the American Horticultural Society headquarters in River Farm. Was part of Washington's family estate down there many, many years ago. And from there, display gardens in summer. And this big, bold white plant right in here is a hydrangea. I think it's called the wood hydrangea or smooth hydrangea. I lose track of the name of it because this was actually found growing in the wild. But when you look at just the native hydrangeas, the blossom size on it is probably about 1/3 or 1/4 the size that's on this particular one. So I think if I remember the story correctly, this was somebody was actually a gardener, was out horseback riding, I think in Annabelle, Illinois. I might have that story mixed up, but she's riding through the woods and finds this remarkable hydrangeas just growing naturally in the woods, but huge showy white blossoms, like 2-3 times the size of most of the others, and says, wow, that's really amazing. Discovers that plant and that propagates. And this has been grown in gardens for many, many years, as far back as I can remember. And so this is what we call the Annabelle hydrangea. So it's a cultivar of the native plant. If you saw the native one, it would be like this plant, but much, much, much more diminished in the size of the flowers. This one's picked for that particularly large blossom. Now there are new varieties that have come on the market that maybe have a pink coloration to it. Some of them they breed for larger blooms, but it all started from just a plant that was growing out in the woods. Right behind it is the bottle brush buckeye. This back there, this kind of has these tassels of white flowers, which again is kind of a collector's plant. You don't see them used in gardens too often, but it is an amazing plant when it blooms in summer. It's good for hummingbirds. Will come by and go after those blossoms. It's a fairly short bloom season, or to be more correct, what happens is these flowers, they kind of start opening from bottom to top. They move up. So sort of the bottom flowers kind of start to wither and dry before the top flowers even open. So we get it in this like perfect condition, for a period of time. But it's really, really interesting foliage on there. Serves for hummingbirds and serves as a larval food for many caterpillars. And it's just a wonderful landscape plant to add to any garden. Right. Again, going through this sort of palette of options that you have. This will be another summer bloomer, the button bush. Absolutely love this shrub. It will grow almost in swamps. It will even tolerate some standing water. So many of us, many of you, and many of us have problems with drainage. It feels like we're getting more rain here in the mid-Atlantic region than we used to be as our weather keeps shifting and moving on us. And so this is a plant that, again, is growing in popularity because people want native plants and they fit the conditions that we're growing in. It's such a distinctive flower. I don't really exactly know what more to say about that. The picture just kind of says it all there. I mean, it is so eye-catching, just the unique shape and form of it. This, again, the pollinators go crazy for it when it's bloom. It produces a lot of nectar and draws pollinators from everywhere. We have varieties now that stay smaller because, again, a lot of these plants get sort of tall and leggy plants. So now if you get some of the cultivars for it, you can bring them down to size and make a really interesting plant, for the summer garden, while you are helping to support, again, all our native ecology that's out there. A way underutilized tree, small tree. I have seen Virginia fringe tree, and this is like the exception, but I've seen some in the woodland area that might even grow 25, 30 feet tall, but that's when they're surrounded in an oak forest and they have to compete for sunlight and they're reaching way up in there trying to capture some sun. Normally they stay much smaller. It's kind of a medium-sized tree. Kind of think of it more as a dogwood size. They typically have this multi-stemmed form that you kind of see and picture on my left is how they would grow. They'll be flowering for us probably next month. Just these tassels of white flowers, which again is really distinctive, just have this light, airy look to them. And they will be fragrant. I mean, the kind of fragrance where you're walking down the sidewalk and saying, what is that? Turning around and you're searching, and you can find sometimes if you're within 10 feet of a fringe tree, you can actually put out a really nice fragrance that's in there. So again, this is a plant that to me starts to really add that whole other dimension of fragrance that I value so much. It seems real variable, though, I have to say, is because I'm making a big deal of this. It's just random. Some of them to me seem to have a stronger, more pronounced fragrance than others. So sometimes it's frustrating because you might have one in your garden and that one's not fragrant, but you plant another one and it is. It's just one of those things that's a little bit hard to predict. But wonderful plant, certainly deserves more attention for that kind of mid-sized ornamental tree that so many of us are looking for in our gardens. And that's one of the things is I keep emphasizing these plants, they're smaller because we're gardening in smaller spaces. Don't want to diminish the absolute importance and value of having really large or really old trees in your landscape. They are really what provide the structure and support so much valuable wildlife and support other plants. But again, a lot of times it's just a fact of life where we're living in crowded communities where we may not be able to look into that long run picture of it. But this sweet bay magnolia, again, that will be flowering for us more as we go into May or June. This is another almost bog plant that grows in these wet conditions. Many of you are familiar with Magnolia grandifolia, or the southern magnolia. Southern magnolia is the one that looks like this, but it's a true evergreen. It's got larger leaves, larger flowers, darker green, they're glossier. And we can grow that one. It's not exactly a Virginia native. I think it came up to about North Carolina, and then humans helped it over the line up into Virginia. But it's certainly what I'm going to call it, a near native. But this is the one, sweet bay magnolia, that actually was growing here in our ground, in our soil, in place long before European colonization goes. But they have that same similar kind of look. But this is deciduous. It's a smaller tree, smaller leaves, smaller blossoms. Again, it does have a nice fragrance in there, grows in moist, boggy environments, but in the wintertime, it will shed most of its leaves. If it's kind of a mild winter, you can get it somewhat as what we call a semi-evergreen. This, again, you can see in the background, this is the Korean garden out at Meadowlark, a place that I love to frequent visit, just go out and learn and see for myself how some of these plants are growing and performing that I may not be able to fit and have and enjoy in my own garden. That open flower and everything is kind of it has a very old history. It's in the evolution of plants. Those go way back. Again, that is thought that probably helps to support beetles as pollinators. So it's not just butterflies and bees, but beetles also get in and play the game. While I was out there last fall, I just couldn't really help but take a picture of this, another native. You rarely see this plant in residential landscapes. This is the big leaf magnolia. I thought, since I opened this can of worms on magnolias, let's go for it. The individual leaves on this thing can grow to be like 1 or 2 feet long. I try and have that picture of the fall color and the park bench, but it gives almost a tropical feel to the landscape, because the size of that leaf is getting almost like what you might expect off of a banana plant. Because it can be a large tree and because it has kind of this large coarse texture, it's not used very often in residential landscapes. And I think mostly that's because it just needs some room to grow. There are some smaller cultivars, which the industry has made available for smaller properties. But if you want something that's a little bit distinctive, maybe a little unusual, and you've got some room for it to grow, talk to us about this. It's a plant that couldn't even find in the trade several years ago. They're still available in very limited quantities, but it's one that is in production, and we try to make available to you as much as possible. While I'm talking about gum trees, and I think I only have 1 or 2 more to go, and then we're going to start taking questions, because I know I'm just kind of rambling off this list of trees, but I have to put in some of my favorites. The black gum, back to saying we need different canopy heights. We need the ground level with the perennials. We need an understory of shrubs. We need to have the upper canopy of trees, because insects and wildlife, they're not distributed just uniformly over the ground, but also vertically up and down throughout. So we got to have it all, guys. Create as diverse a landscape as you can. And in my book, it's hard to beat black gum. I love the fall season, as you know, and you've probably seen in the bio. I have a bias there, but this tree just lights up in the fall. It's one of the first to put on the color, just brilliant coloration. You can see this growing by a detention pond, so it does fine with heavy, dense soils, even construction altered soils that are in there. And in the summertime, it's a dark green leaf, but the tree has a nice structure to it. It's clean, it doesn't make any mess. Just an excellent shade tree if you have this space or need to put that one in. And again, there's some varieties on that now. I realize I don't, this might be the only evergreen I put into this slide set, but the red cedar, again, Virginia native. Red cedar is actually a juniper, so it kind of had a little bad, I guess I'm going to use the word past tense, had, hopefully that's changed, a little bit of a bad reputation because I think it's prickly. And people don't like it because it's prickly. Well, that's just the way the tree goes, so just get over it. And they would tend to have, sometimes they would brown out or bronze in the winter. So now, again, the industry, we've got some varieties that may hold a little bit more of a consistent blue coloration. There's some varieties that are very tight and narrow and more densely grown. Of course, there's straight species, but this is a fantastic tree for wildlife. Again, birds need shelter during the winter, and so it gives them a very nice, sheltered, protected environment. Inside that tree, also they will produce the juniper berries, which help support good wildlife. And everybody's looking for privacy between, you and your neighbor. So here's a way that you can incorporate really a beautiful tree that serves the purpose of giving that privacy, but you're also helping sustain a plant and animal community by using the native tree. So these are all things that you have to take into consideration. I'm going to start taking questions now, but I wanted to put this slide up here, and we're going to leave it up here for just a minute if you want to collect any of these resources. There's tons of good resources out there for you to learn more about native plants. The first one that I put up there is the Plant Nova Natives group. I'm holding their field guide. This is actually outdated. They have a new one that's just been released. But what's nice is the state they divided, I can't remember, it's about 6 or 8 different regions. So this is native plants for Northern Virginia. There would be a similar thing guide if you're in Tidewater, similar if you're in the southwestern state, but it's very regionalized. So they didn't just go to say, oh, this is a North American native, or this is just a Virginia native, but these are plants that they have identified as good landscape candidates that are specifically grown in the Northern Virginia region. So you can see the website up there. The book that I'm holding is available for free online in a digital format, or if you come to the garden center, for a few dollars, I don't have it here, but these, you can also purchase a printed version. Another resource that I rely on there is that Flora of Virginia. Again, back when I was studying all this stuff, it came in book form, big fat book, technical, not easy to use. What you need to do, folks, is go to that floravirginia.org. For about 20 bucks, you can download all this onto your phone, and in a much easier to use or easier to search kind of format, to help you determine what's native, where it grows. And then the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, that's really the state agency that oversees a lot of the conservation of natural resources, not just the plants, but here specifically, it's going to give us that list of native plants. So with that, I've used up almost all my time, but Danny, let's try to make time for a few questions.
All right, sounds good, David. Thank you for all that info. We're just going to start off the top here. First question from one of our viewers is the dwarf crested iris that you talked about earlier on. Can that handle bog-like conditions?
I think it would. I can't 100% say for sure because I haven't seen it growing in that environment, but iris are, as a group, iris are extremely tolerant of wet conditions. So I'm making a guess on that, so please double check me. I think it's worth giving a try. Again, to me, gardening is a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, and I think it's worth giving it a try because you could even just buy a little small starter plant. You don't have to invest a whole lot and see how it does.
Great. Okay, so next one is going back to the green and gold plant you were talking about. Um, is there a scientific name for that plant, and can you spell that for us?
Oh, I am not a speller, but it's chrysogonum, which is CHRYSOGNUM is the genus it's in, and that's Virginicus, like Virginica, like Virginia. So Chrysogonum virginicus is the botanical and that again, that's a plant. You guys, I watch how I spend my money. Everybody's different, but I buy the little plants. You can buy that in a little. I think I have one here. You just buy a little plant like this. I look for one. See, it's got these little trailers going off there. I find one that's got the more shoots I see. This one has 1, 2, 3 shoots coming off. That's what I look for when I'm buying plants. I put it in and let it go.
All right. So next question from one of our viewers is deals with Joe Pye weed. They had already trimmed it once, but apparently it's still a little bit too tall. Can they trim it again?
I would say yes, but I really don't want to trim it. I'm going to say like mid-July might be your deadline on pruning. If you start pruning it much later, like if you were to prune it in August, then you're really setting your bloom back. It may not start flowering for you until September or something like that. So you really can't hurt the plant, but it also starts to delay or interfere with its flowering season. But if you wanted to, let's say, even prune it in early June, maybe again in late June, something like that, you should be able to do that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Next question is one of our viewers has a wet area, and they're wondering if you have any recommendations for shrubs that would do well in an overall wet area.
Oh, a lot of the plants that we showed today do well in that, like that button bush that's got the little flower. It looks like it's about the size of a golf ball, kind of looks like a little Sputnik satellite. That is definitely a bog plant for wet conditions. That sweet bay magnolia we talked to was a small tree, not exactly shrub, but that will grow in wet conditions. The winterberry holly, which is a deciduous holly, it sheds and has berries in the winter for winter wet conditions. Our red twig dogwoods for wet conditions. We have so many plants, native plants will tolerate, because again, we tend to live in a dense, poorly drained area. Again, I will refer you to that that guide with Plant Nova natives. Also, they have in this book, because I'm just giving you off the top of my head ideas, in the back they have these lists and references, and they will identify specifically the growing conditions. That's some of these symbols you can't see, but they'll tell you what's suitable for wet conditions, what's more suitable for dry conditions. Aronia, the chokecherry, beautiful plant, underutilized as shrub, nice fall coloration. I mean, that's certainly one you should consider for wet conditions.
Okay, great. Keep moving along because we still have a couple. We have a minute or two left, but we'll try to get as many questions answered as possible. Next is fringe trees. How do you tell the difference between the male and female fringe trees?
Well, they don't come labeled like that, unfortunately. So if you are buying one, it has the berries on it, that's obviously a female. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we have to catch it while it's in bloom, while the flowers are in full open, and examine the flowers. So that's again, I wish that the industry would do a better job of identifying male and female. Some of our salespeople will, if they see them in bloom, they will put the identifier on it, but that's real hit or miss. I mean, it's not reliable. So basically, unless it's in full flower, we get to do and you have to look at it on a magnifying glass of the microscope. It's little tiny details, looking for whether it's got the anthers in there or not. You can't tell. You just can't really tell.
Gotcha. All right, well, let's do one more, I think, is going back to that big leaf magnolia. What's the max height that you would expect for that big leaf magnolia? How big can it get?
Now, just the straight species can go 60 feet tall. I mean, it's a big tree. We have a variety. I can't remember the name of it. It's ashy or something like that. But there is a variety that we sell for landscape use that I think tops out at closer to about 30, 35 feet. But again, it's whenever we say compact, dwarf, small, all these are relative terms. That's relative to the parent. So it may be half the size of the parent, but even then it's still a pretty sizable tree.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that is all the time we have for today. Someone did point out that apparently today, which is April 14th, is the U.S. National Gardening Day. Did you know that, David?
I didn't know that. I feel bad that kind of slipped by me, but what a great way to spend it here.
Exactly. Well, thank you everyone for watching with us today. I believe we'll be back with another webinar this coming Tuesday. I'm not sure offhand right now which one it is, but if you look on our website, you will see what we have available. Sally will be back to be hosting. I will probably be behind the camera that day. For those of you who did not get your questions answered, there's only a handful left. Feel free to reach out to me through our contact us form. You just go to the merrifieldgardencenter.com. Down at the bottom, it says contact us. Click on it, and then write your question, and I'll get it, and I can send that off to David or whoever needs to get whoever has the answer for you. I think I think that is about it today. So thank you all, everyone. We did record this, and we'll have this up on our YouTube page. You can also email Sally at sburrows@mgcmail.com, and she can also send you the link. We should have this video up in a few days from now. But thank you, everyone, and happy National Gardening Day.
We'll see everybody in a couple of weeks.